Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Richard called my attention to a story out of New Zealand, one of my favorite places on earth. I've never been there, but I'd like to go someday. A lot of cool stuff happening down there, and I got some friends there as well. Out of Newsweek, man told he has to move his house by 3 feet or pay $315,000. So it's just a simple matter of moving your house 3 feet. Not that far. We're not saying move it to Australia or something. Just move it 3 feet to one side, please. Thank you very much. Ukarsha Laharia wrote the story, and of course, we all know what's happening here. Okay, we all know what happened. It's just a question of what's the remedy and how did it happen. A small error, about 3 feet, made by a construction company could cost somebody a lot of money in New Zealand. We're just not sure who. Is it the homeowner or someone else? A homeowner in Auckland is in legal trouble after his new home was discovered to be 3 feet over his property line. So there's a property line, you know, the dotted line on the ground, like on a map. His house is 3 feet over the property line. That mistake in construction means his home, of course, is built partially on his neighbor's land. And now they call this a fine, but apparently there's a couple things going on here. And one is that he was supposed to have the house built here, and it got built here. So there, I believe, is a violation with the permitting process. But likewise, there's a problem with his neighbor saying, hey, you've got your house on my property. Could you please move it over, 3 feet? Reportedly, the homeowner hired a home building company in Auckland, and they specialize in residential work. And he hired them to design and construct a 3-bedroom house in Papakura. And I could be mispronouncing it, but I think I'm close. The house was almost done in mid-2020, according to the New Zealand Herald, a paper I did not deliver as a child, before unfortunate news broke of a boundary mix-up. The 3-foot difference brought construction to a grinding halt in August. And grinding halt is an international term of art. The homeowner says, it's a nightmare for me. I wake up in the middle of the night and I think, how am I going to solve this? The neighboring property is owned by a development company, and according to the NZ Herald, wants the homeowner to either move his house or pay $315,000 in damages. And they are going to take legal action to resolve this. So it appears they're saying, move the house or leave it there and pay us $315,000 in damages, in essence, purchasing that strip of land. Now, the $315,000 is New Zealand money, which apparently is a little bit less than American money. So in US dollars, for those of you in my audience who are actually from America, about $227,000 US, about $227,000 US. Now, the project manager who was involved in building this house said that he found the building error while checking the documents. The first person I called was the surveyor, but he had actually marked the house in the right place according to the building consent, which I believe is the permit. So I notified the homeowner, and that's when everything stopped. The builder had consulted another company, a design company, to develop the plans and file the building consent for the house, and that the fault for the boundary dispute rests with them. So different people are now pointing their fingers at other people, or everyone's pointing their fingers at someone else. However, according to the house owner, the design architectural person filed the building consent and Auckland Council approved it. The council is ultimately responsible. So there's always that question that if you go into a municipal place, whether it's a building department or otherwise, and you ask them what to do and they tell you you should do this, and then you go out and do it and it turns out that somebody was wrong, who's at fault there? And I know people who've built things and they brought in an inspector from the county or the township who signed off on something. And a short while later, another inspector shows up and goes, oh, well, they're from the county, I'm from the township, or vice versa. I'm here to inspect stuff. And it's like, wait, what? And it turns out that sometimes that can happen with overlapping jurisdictions. So the blame game doesn't end there. According to Ukarsha Laharia, the owner's lawyer wrote to the builder and the designer and said, it seems likely the issue has arisen as a result of an error made at the design stage, likely to have occurred when the resource consent information was transferred by the designer to the plan submitted for building consent. And again, building consent, I'm assuming, is permission to build or a building permit, which is what we call it here in America. Moving the house back to correct boundary lines would cost about $150,000, which apparently can be done. I've seen houses that you couldn't just pick up and move, okay? I mean, not all homes are mobile. And some people here have said that they're willing to help out with some of this, but nobody wants to take full responsibility. So the project manager for the builder said they're willing to help, but said that there is a need to negotiate who's going to pay for it. So willing to help and pay for it might not be the same thing. Now, the council checked everything and approved the building consent, but the council didn't cross-check that it was supposed to be 1 meter within the boundary, he added. Meanwhile, people have claimed that they asked the council to cross-check the site. And the question is, does the council really get down into measuring things and looking at things and so on when it comes to issuing their consents? The gentleman from the builder said, I clearly noted it in the building consent, and they said they needed to read it in conjunction with the resource consent. It's the council's responsibility to check it. Meanwhile, the person next door acknowledged the situation is unfortunate, but has no interest in knowing the culprit. I think in the end, the other parties have to provide a solution because it's preventing us from selling the property. So the developer next door just wants to sell their property, but they can't because there's this property next door with a house on it that's on their property. And when someone comes to buy this property, they're going to say, wait, what's with that house that's too close to this house? That will come up. I think in the end, the other parties have to provide a solution because it's preventing us from selling the property. If it's not settled, the liability will keep accruing month by month, and that's up to the other parties to find out what went wrong. I have no idea what's going on. That's the guy next door. Meanwhile, the homeowner, caught between the center of the paperwork error, had to pick between two expensive outs, and moving the house turned out to be the cheaper option. And yes, it does say caught between the center of the paperwork error. Doesn't say what else they're caught between. I'm not sure how you get caught between a center, but maybe that's a Kiwi saying. I don't know. Everyone seems to be blaming someone else, the owner told the New Zealand Herald. I'm already paying $1,000 a week for the mortgage on this house and the rent for the other place where I'm living. A spokesperson for the Auckland Council is looking into the issue, according to the New Zealand Herald. Now, I've not heard of a home being built across the line like that in recent years. We did a story not too long ago about the guy who had a garage that was put across a boundary line. But a garage is not the same as a house in terms of how complicated it would be to move it. In that case, I believe the guy just took a chainsaw to it and drove, sawed it off at the dotted line. But what we do often hear about more commonly is homes that are built too close to property lines and they violate the setbacks. So in many areas, a building code will say if you own a piece of property and you're going to build on the piece of property, you have to build back a certain distance from the boundaries. So if there's a road, for instance, which would be the front of the property, you must build back a certain distance from the road. You can't build right up against the road in many places. And likewise, on the sides, there'll be setbacks, and they'll say you have to build back so many feet from the property line. And so that way, if you go down a street, you'll see a certain amount of uniformity between the houses. So you see houses, and there appears to be roughly the same distance between these houses. And there are some places that don't have these rules, and you'll often see houses built right up to the edges of the property lines, at least side to side. They'll still be set back from the street, right? But the setback is something that is as important as the property boundary itself. And I've heard stories before where somebody comes into a neighborhood, the setback is 20 feet on each side, and they build out to 15. And they're still on their property, and they're 15 feet from their boundary line. And the neighbor says, hey, or the building inspector says, hey, your house is 5 feet close to the line, too close to the line. It needs to go back. It needs to move. And I've seen examples where I'm pretty sure the people knew they did that. And they're hoping that either they could get away with it, or they're hoping that once it was done, what are they going to do? Make me tear it down? Yeah, they will in some cases. And I also know that if the other neighbor is further in than just the setback, they might be willing to sell a strip of land. So let's suppose that there's two lots next to each other, and the home over here is a small lot, and the setback is 20 feet, whatever, and they actually are 50 feet that way. They're 50 feet. They got 30 feet to spare. So someone builds here, and they build right at the property line, and they were supposed to build back. And the question is, well, if this line was moved, this would still be legal. But to move the line, you got to buy the property from the people next door. And I've heard of instances where somebody goes, you know something? It's 1 foot. I'll sell you the foot. I don't care. I've also seen it before. Somebody goes, no, you know something? You should have spotted that. I don't want to sell my property. I don't like the idea of somebody forcing me to sell my property. So it's either you pay me a ton of money for it or move your house over a foot or whatever it is. And so it's the setbacks I hear about more often than anything else. But there is a problem that a lot of people have, and they don't understand the mindset. And I'm not saying it's necessarily right. There isn't a right or wrong on this, by the way. But I remember years ago, and I used to follow different types of racing very, very closely. And I remember reading an article where a car had passed inspection several times in the period leading up to a race. And the morning of the race, some of the officials were walking through the pits just as the cars were being rolled out to be raced. And an official looked down and spotted a violation of an extremely obscure rule, but the rule was on the books. There's no question it was a violation. And the official goes, oh, boom, that right there can't be raced in that condition. You got to fix that. And it involved them actually moving a piece, I think it was an oil cooler, but it was something that was not going to be just literally, flip a switch and it's fixed. It was going to be take it back in the pits and jimmy with it for an hour. And the team owner went nuts. He went nuts. And he goes, that thing was inspected several times. It passed all the inspections. I should be allowed to race it. And the officials at the track said, you know something? It's not our job to catch you. It's your job to follow the rules. So that's what happens. So when it comes to building your home, okay, it is the job of the home builder, and that could be the owner of the house, if they're in charge of it, or it could be a construction company, it could be whoever. Whoever is building the house, it's their job to build it in the right place. And there are a lot of checks in place to keep these things from happening. And so it's kind of strange that this happened to such an extent, but it also explains why it made international news. Because normally I'm not here talking to you about pieces of property in New Zealand. But here we are, Newsweek. And Utkar Shalaharia wrote it, Richard sent it to me. Man told he has to move his house by 3 feet or pay $315,000 in New Zealand money. There you go. Questions or comments? Put them below. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. My grandmother started walking 5 miles a day when she was 60. She's 97 now, and we don't know where she is.